welcome to Wednesday night Bible study at the Mount Olive Church. Thank you so much for studying with us tonight. Let me first say to all of our special guests, thank you so much for putting us in your schedule, including us on your calendar to study the book of Habakkuk. And then as always, I want to remind the people of the Mount Olive Church, I love you. Thank you so much for not waning into a commitment to discipleship. We continue to prioritize the Word of God in our lives as a congregation and as Christians individually. So thank you so much for your commitment. I miss you. I love you. I'm praying for you. I know you are doing the same for me. I want to encourage you to continue to be steadfast, to be unmovable, always abounding in this work that God has called you to do. We know our labor is not in vain. Be encouraged. I want you to maintain your hope, knowing that God is God. He always will be God. And we are going to continue to put our faith in him. And we're going to trust him for the journey. So be encouraged. Continue to be safe, to be smart, to be sensible, and of course to be prayerful. We introduced on last Wednesday the book of Habakkuk and how this particular prophet was engaged in a major situation as it relates to theodicy. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But he was in a tight predicament in terms of how would he continue to trust the God of his ancestors in the midst of such unpredictable, unparalleled times. And we can see, and we will continue to note, that our times parallel the times of Habakkuk. I don't want us to immediately rush to comparing our time with his time before we really feel the tension, before we feel the pressure, before we get a sense of the tone of his prayer, of his complaint to God, so that it helps us to humanize Habakkuk. So often we see people in the Bible as being super, more than, greater than we are, but nope, they're just flesh and blood individuals just as we are. And so I want us to listen in on the tone of his prayer, the pain that he is feeling, because he is under a lot of pressure. He is bearing a heavy burden with what is taking place in the midst of his prophetic ministry, and he is having to cry out to God, not only in his own behalf, but also on behalf of people. So we will definitely come across those parallels, those examples that are true now as they were then. But let's begin with a few introductory remarks, and then we'll walk through tonight's study. And again, this is a study of a book, yet we're going to approach it expositionally. We're going to walk through it. We have an outline that the outline comes from the text itself, and we're not imposing our own cute outline to make it line up. But no, this is how the passage flows, and so it is a study of a book. So let me first begin by hopefully helping us to hear his complaint and to feel what he is saying. This conversation between Habakkuk and God is a conversation of lament. And the word lament, you could say it is to express deep grief for or about. And I want to encourage you as an individual believer, and of course the church corporately, that we might want consider learning how to lament. And to lament is healthy. In fact, there's an entire book called Lamentations, and these are the laments of Jeremiah as well as some of the other people about what was taking place in that particular time. And I want to encourage you again to lament. It is healthy for us to lament. And so we've all experienced grief any number of times and about different experiences. And so I want us to get that this is a book of lament. It is not anything else. He does, in fact, get to a place where his joy is restored. But again, it is a lament. And so I want us to, as we read these verses, I want us to hear and feel that this is a book of lament. It's a conversation between Habakkuk and God, and he is crying out. It's deep grief because of what is taking place in the life of his people. So that's first. It's lament. So we want to know the tone of the book. But then secondly, as I mentioned earlier, he is dealing with a problem of what scholars call theodicy. Theodicy, it is this attempt to square the goodness and justice of God in the presence of unbridled evil, wickedness, disasters, catastrophe, and on and on and on. We know God to be good, and we know God to be just, and at the same time, when you consider all of the different things that are taking place in our individual lives as well as internationally, what is taking place all over this world, we just wonder, when is God going to say something? Why is it that God seemingly is not responding? And so this conversation, the basis of it, is Habakkuk is having great issue. He's having great issue in trying to balance the goodness and justice of God in the midst of all of the wickedness, all of the evil that is taking place in God's world. Okay, so there's two factors we have to consider. It is a book of lament. He is grieving. He is expressing that grief. He's not hiding that grief. He hadn't tucked it away for a later time. No, he is putting it all out. And so he is lamenting, and here again is this issue about a good God allowing evil, allowing wickedness to take place in his world that he called good. Then number three, I want us to understand what it means to be in distress. Because in a moment you'll see that that's kind of the first category that we want to deal with. You've heard a damsel in distress. You've heard about a ship in distress. You've even heard about an animal being in distress. And so distress, it is the condition of being in need of immediate assistance. We talk about a ship in distress. A ship is out, of course, on the waters. The waters are treacherous and they're violent. There's a storm, and the ship has lost some of its communication, some of its technology is not working, and it is in dire strait. It needs immediate assistance, or the ship is going to go down. Or a damsel in distress, someone who this is kind of like a real 911 call, where if help does not arrive now, then it's over. When you talk about an animal being in distress, we've seen it on television, and some of us we've seen it in real life, where an animal is at a tipping point or a breaking point, and that animal needs assistance. Sometimes it has to do, I've seen it at zoos when the crowds have gotten too close. I've seen it with weather conditions, or it has to do something with the environment, and that animal is anxious, that animal is worried, that animal is upset, that animal is uptight. And so this gives us a sense of how Habakkuk is feeling at this particular point in time. And so now that we've got those three factors out of the way, so to speak, let's move now to, that helps us with the context. Let's move now to the outline. And that is distress over our moral condition. Verses 2, 3, and 4 from chapter 1. Now, I say our distress over our moral condition because this is where Habakkuk is. He is in a bad place concerning the morals or the lack of morals of God's people. Now let's walk through this. I want to read verses 2, 3, and 4. We'll see if you can hear and feel what Habakkuk is feeling. "O Lord, how long shall I cry?" This is a loud shout for help. He is in distress, and you will not listen. Or cry to you violence, and you will not save. Do you feel that? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Habakkuk is saying that what he is feeling is God's fault. Habakkuk cannot simply go on vacation. He can't simply block out or barricade himself such that he is not aware of what is taking place. It is all around him, and he feels as though God has burdened him with all that is taking place. And he sees it and he feels it. Here again, God, why are you making me look at? Why is it you are showing all of this to me? And he says, look at the trouble. And then destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. And when we hear that, we immediately begin to rush to what is taking place in our land. Let me read that again. Destruction and violence are before me. Everywhere you look, you see it. Some people don't even want to watch the news because it seems as if it's nothing but bad news, and it's just more of the same. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. And here, the imagery here is that of a pack of wolves surrounding its prey, or greedy vultures surrounding its prey. Therefore, judgment comes for perverted. That is, the prey of the wolf as well as the vulture has no recourse. They have no way of winning. They have no way of surviving. So that gives us a sense in verses 2 through 4 of this distress call, or this call of distress from Habakkuk concerning the conditions that he is having to live in. Now the lack of morals that he sees. Now this initially is not about people who are anti-God. It's not about the Babylonians. We knew that they were anti-God. We knew that they were pagans. We knew that they were heathens. Habakkuk is also alluding to God's people. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So when you think about the distress of the whole moral fabric of our nation, you think about that. It's distressing. It kind of like what Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. This mourning has to do with the moral corruption. It has to do with all of the wickedness and the evil, the wrongdoing that is taking place on a large magnitude level. I mean, it is everywhere it is taking place. So now we want to move to, are we sensitive to what is taking place? Notice what we have here in the outline, our sensitivity to wrong. Are we really mourning? Are we saddened? Are we broken? Do we grieve about or for what is taking place all around us? And I don't want to jump to our time too quickly, but again, we have to ask ourselves this question: can we relate to what Habakkuk is feeling? Let me read the A clause of verse number 3 again. Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? The picture here, this is not just picking somebody's pocket. This is not just stealing hubcaps. No, this is major violence. You're talking about citizens who are not law-abiding citizens. This is what he is talking about. The excessive injustice, the excessive violence that is taking place in this world. And so we raise this question, are we sensitive to what is taking place in our world? Let me move to the next thing. I don't want to get stuck. We have a lot to cover here. Then secondly, under distress over our moral condition, our helplessness in the presence of wrong. There's a crisis that is taking place in the life of Habakkuk and in the times in which he was living. There was, first of all, there was this crisis on a horizontal level or a horizontal plane. That is how the people were treating each other. There was a loss of respect. There was a loss of concern. They did not see life as sacred. There was no dignity in terms of how individuals treated each other and how they dealt with each other. And so there was this horizontal, there was this crisis between people and how they were dealing with each other, how they were treating each other. And it seems as if it was getting worse. But then, if there was going to be help with this crisis, it would have to come from the vertical plane. The people, they could not solve the crisis. Although they created it, they could not solve it. It would have to come from a revival. God would literally have to solve it. It was the vertical, the relationship with God and his people, and the relationship with God's people with God. And so this sense of helplessness, this is why Habakkuk is crying out, how long shall I cry for help? It's been going on for a long time. We don't know exactly how long, but it says here, how long shall I cry for help? And you will not listen. You've been crying out for a long time, but things were not getting any better. But then we move to our frustration. Our frustration over the loss of law and justice. To put this in context, this book was written 12 years after King Josiah had in fact found the law, God's law, in a trash can in the temple, He had led the people back to God. A revival broke out, and now that was only 12 years, and now the people are now in the same place. There is no regard to the law of God. There's no regard to godly justice. There again, not only with the anti-God people, not only them, but even with God's people. Here he's talking about lawsuits and just all these different things were taking place. And so all of this gives shape to his distress. We quite often, let me digress just for a moment, we often quote Proverbs 29 and 18 where it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And what that literally means is that when it says where there is no vision, that means the no vision piece is no input from God. Then the people become uncontrollable. They become unmanageable. That is, there is no control. There is unharnessed, unbridled violence, lawlessness. And so whenever the people of God turn aside, turn away from the law of God, then death and destruction and all those other types of catastrophes happen. And so here in context, this is what was talking about. It was the loss of the law. It was no longer the priority. It was no longer important. It was not what the people lived to do and longed for to see manifest in the community. And so here is why Habakkuk is so distressed. And so I ask us this question in terms of summarizing this first statement as it relates to the moral condition. How often do you honestly lament? Not simply just say, boy, times are really hard. Times have really gotten out of control. But now that we understand what it means to lament, how often do you lament? How often do I lament? How often does the congregation of God, the church of God, how often do we break down because of all of the wickedness, all of the violence that is taking place around us, and we don't point the finger at anyone because we are partially the blame? When you think about all the things that are taking place, now we can make this leap from then to now. And that is when you think about all the injustice that takes place. We don't have to leave the city of Saginaw to go participate in a march. We have things that take place right here in our community that should cause us to grieve, that should break our hearts. When you look at our education system, the condition, economic conditions, and just on and on and on, it should cause us to lament. Then you think about all the other things that are taking place that COVID-19 have basically just brought to the surface. They've always been there. You know, the health disparity with African Americans and other minorities in terms of the poor health conditions and the lack of access to what everybody has access to. And now again, you look at the numbers concerning how many disproportionately perishing because of other health-related issues that were already taking place. They were not getting the proper care. But now it's just kind of coming out in the open. When you also think about what recently happened in Georgia, what happened in Minnesota, this is not the first time this has happened. And we see it going on and on and on. I'm just saying to you, as I'm saying to myself, what is our response to it? And I'm not necessarily talking about we should just get out and start marching today. All of that is fine. But first, there has to be a breaking of one's heart. It starts here, such that we're not just marching for 2 days and then go back to business as usual. But it has to be a breaking on the inside. And so how often are we lamenting over our moral condition? Because we have to, when we ask that question, am I my sister or my brother's keeper? What is our answer to that question? How do we respond to, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me? When I was naked, you didn't clothe me? When I was sick, how do we respond to all of those questions and challenges that, in that context, came from Jesus? And so here again, there is this distress that hopefully God will help us to first of all have, and then of course ultimately God has ways and means of healing that. So you got to wonder, why are we feeling what we're feeling now? And I hope we are feeling something. I hope that we're not indifferent. I hope that we are not apathetic, but we are empathetic, and that we feel the weightiness of what people are going through. We care about what they are going through. We're not worried about trivial stuff like, I'm tired of being indoors. When you think about what people are going through, many people, but the point of it is that this is a book of lament. And he is feeling the weightiness of what is taking place in the lives of people. And hopefully you and I are feeling some of that as we think about our own neighborhoods, our own communities, our own state, our own world. Well, let's move to what is next in the lesson, in this book. And that is Habakkuk, seemingly, he gets this notion that something awesome is going to happen. Listen to what verse number 5 says. Look at the nations and see. Be astonished. Be astounded. For a work is being done in your days that you would not believe in if you were told. Now God is going to reveal this to Habakkuk. And here, God is always aware of what is taking place, and God is always doing what only God can do. He is always doing it. And just because we cannot see what he is doing does not mean he is not doing anything. And so here there is this amazement that is going to take place as a result of God intervening. That is, in a way that we can see, that we can experience. And here, again, it helps us to say that it is going to be something that is unbelievable. It's kind of like, have you ever gotten up on Christmas morning and you were amazed at your gift or your gifts? You could not believe it. You were so amazed that you lost your breath. You couldn't breathe for a moment. Or as it relates to a birthday gift, something along those lines. That's the state of unbelief and surprise that Habakkuk is talking about here. But then God's use, something else that is going to be amazed in terms of how God is going to accomplish it. For I am rousing, I am raising up, I am stirring up the Chaldeans, that fierce nation who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Now here, is going to use a people that are unlike anyone God would use per our perspective or per our choice of who God is going to use. And God is going to use the people's enemy to discipline them or chastise them or to correct them of their errors. It's almost like God using the KKK to bring the NAACP in line in terms of what they really should be doing. Or it's almost like Democrats being used by God to teach the Republicans a lesson. Or God using the Black Lives Matter movement to bring all other organizations or like-minded organizations to the table. This is what your movement started as, but you left your original intent. And so now we have been roused, so to speak, to show you that this is what needs to take place. And here again, God is using the Chaldeans, an unlikely group of people, to discipline his people or to bring them back to where they should have never left from the beginning. And so here in verses 5 through 11, there's this amazement in terms of how God is going to intervene. And here again, you can't put God in a box. God is beyond, his ways are beyond finding out. And so we never know how God is going to do it, but God is going to always be God, and in his own time, God is going to get the glory. And so in verses 6 and 11, let me just say a couple about those verses. Dread and fearsome are they, their justice and dignity proceed from themselves. These are the people who make up laws as they go. These are individuals, no one can tell them what to do. They make up their own laws. And here, God is going to use a lawless people to bring his people that they would return as it relates to submitting to his law. God has some peculiar ways. But you continue with the verse, it says, their horses are swifter than leopards, more menacing than wolves at dusk. Their horses charge. Their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence with faces pressing forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff. Again, they don't submit to authority. Everyone submits to them. They laugh at every fortress. They heap up earth to take it. That is, if a nation feels as if they have a strong army, they laugh at that. They are a lawless people, a uncaring, a ruthless people. Then they sweep, again verse 11, then they sweep by like the wind. They transgress and become guilty. Their own might is their God. You're talking about arrogance. You're talking about idolatry. Chaldeans. And who is God going to use to ultimately get his people back where they should be? So that's the amazement here. What God ultimately is going to do. And here, you can't put God in a box. You just can't do it. And so this statement of summation, God will work, but it will be a work of judgment first. It's amazing to me that what we want from God, we want to experience his generosity before we experience his discipline. But there are times when God is going to discipline us first and then the generosity will come later. So here, God is going to respond to his people first with judgment, and he's using a lawless people to do it. Let me move to this third category, distress over God's use of the wicked. Verse 12, let me pick that up. So now we hear again, here's Habakkuk. Do we have any questions on the pause? Any questions? Okay. So with verses 12 through 17, let's pick up on Habakkuk's distress. Are you not from of old, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? Habakkuk is really saying, no, wait a minute. You are going to use a people who do not belong to you as it relates to a relationship to discipline or chastise the people you have a relationship with. And God says, yes. Everything in creation I created. And so God can use whatever he has created. And Habakkuk, he's grieving because of this, because in his mind and according to everything that he has known as law, as we call scripture, this is contrary. It's contrary in three ways. Number one, it's contrary to his name. This phrase, are you not from of old, is literally, art thou not God? That is, there has never been a time where God has not been God. And God does not change. So Habakkuk here, he doesn't get this. And he understands the holiness of God. The holiness of God is the standard for doing the right thing, saying the right thing, thinking the right thing because of who God is. And so now it's as though in the mind of Habakkuk that God is tolerating what he has always been against. Habakkuk, he's in a difficult place. And so here there is distress over the fact that this seemingly goes against his understanding of who God is. But then it's also contrary to his very nature. Now I just mentioned that, O Lord, you have marked them for judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for punishment. Your eyes are too pure to behold evil, and you cannot look on wrongdoing. Here again, Habakkuk is saying, wait a minute, all of a sudden, you tolerate wickedness, you tolerate evil, that can exist in your presence, totally against his nature. But then lastly, totally against his justice. It is contrary to God's justice. And Habakkuk feels as though God has seemingly taken an alternate route to justice. It's like God has gotten off of the path that leads to justice, and now he is doing something that does not look like the God of his salvation. He indicates this in verses 14 through 17. Let me just read the part of the B portion of 13 and a couple of the verses. Why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they? That is to say, these are the most vulnerable, he says, among us. They have no one to stand up for them. They have no one to speak for them. And you're using the Chaldeans against them, and you're not saying anything, you're not doing anything. He goes on, you have made people like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. So at this point, Habakkuk, he's distressed. He's broken over how God is going to use the very people who have been oppressing people. He's going to use those people to get his people back in shape. Now, ultimately, that was going to happen, but Habakkuk didn't know that that's why God was using him. And like Habakkuk, this statement of summation on rule number 3, like Habakkuk, we cannot figure out how all of this works together. We just can't figure it out. We don't understand. We don't understand what is going on now. We don't understand how long it's been going. We don't understand that. But again, I want to ask us, are we vulnerable enough to be honest? Are we real with our relationship with God such that we can lament, understanding that God is God, and God does not have a chip on his shoulder wherein there's anything that we can say or do that makes him insecure about who he is. Well, let me move to this last part, the conclusion here. I want to read verses 15. I need to read these last 3 verses, and then we'll stop. The enemy brings all of them up with a hook. Just the people have no recourse. They're talking about how the Chaldeans treat people. He drags them out of his net. He gathers them in his place. And so he rejoices and exults. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings. For by them his portion is lavish and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy? This is where Habakkuk is. Now, in conclusion, when you look at Habakkuk's complaint, Habakkuk is complaining to God about all of the wrong that is taking place in God's world. He's complaining to God about that. Habakkuk is not, however, accusing God of doing wrong. There's a difference. You and I can be brutally honest about all the wrong that we see in our world. But we never want to get to the place where we accuse God of being behind the wrong. That goes against who God is. That goes against his word. That goes against his nature. That goes against his character. That goes against everything that God is, has always been, and will always be. Most of the time, if your relationship, your faith, your hope, your trust in God is going to go to another level in terms of depth, in terms of deepening, most of the time, it comes from an experience where you had to be honest with yourself that everything you thought you knew about God, you now discover there is more to God than you ever will know. Yeah. And sometimes it comes through trials. Sometimes it comes from our worlds being turned upside down, our lives being totally in disarray. And it forces us to be brutally honest first with ourselves so we can be honest with God. And out of that and from that, okay, we grow in our relationship with God. See, the people that are really in your corner are people who have been through something with you. The people who really have your back are people that you all have experienced that you have not experienced with others. The people who are able to sit tight in tight places with you, that's who you really know is in your corner. Not the ones who left you. Not the ones that when it got hot, they scrambled. Not those. But those who have been with you since day one. And you got to know God has been with you since day one. And he will always be with you. But sometimes it takes these types of experiences, these types of situations, for us to really, first of all, understand that we don't know everything about God, and God has to show us that we don't know everything about him, but he also reveals that you know enough about me to trust me. So we want to stop right there in terms of this. This is just part one, chapter 1 to the first line in chapter 2, because Habakkuk, this is his lament, this is his complaint to God, and then God is going to respond to that complaint. Here again is his complaint to God, and God is going to respond to his complaint. If you want to lament to God because of what you see, what you are experiencing, what you don't understand, God will respond to you. All right? So let's stop right there to see if we have any questions.
Is not free will that of God?
Is free will of God? Yes. The question is free will of God, and the answer is yes. Yes. We have the freedom to choose. And here is how we come to know God does not have us like we are puppets on a string. No. Manipulating our moves, manipulating our decision, our choices. No, that's not God. God is a loving Father, and God loves us, and he bestows grace and favor and mercy on us, that we might be inspired and persuaded to make the right choices and decisions. We'll be motivated, we'll be encouraged, we'll be lifted to make those choices and decisions. No, God does not make us do anything in a sense as though he is the master puppeteer and we are puppets on the string. So yes, we have free will, which is another reason why discernment, the gift of discernment, is critical to our walk and to how we and for how we conduct ourselves and even how we carry ourselves in the midst of such times where you have the ungodly, you have the worldly responding in ways and means that we know that are totally against the word of God, and you got to be careful that we don't become like they are. Okay, another question?
How can we not let the terrible things of the world overwhelm us?
How can we not allow the terrible things of this world to overwhelm us? The way not to do is by acting as though it's not that bad. No. It is seeing what is, and then also going back to what God has said in his word. And God will fulfill his word. God will bring to pass that which he has made a covenant with himself concerning what he would do in the lives of his people and what he would do with his world. And so, yes, you got to face the good days and the bad days. You got to face the darkness as well as the light. But you face it with faith. The just shall live by faith. And then in our next session, when we move from part 1, we're going to actually talk about learning to walk by faith. Learning what does it mean, the just shall live by faith. But that's an example of it. That's an analogy of it. Is that you can't walk around with one eye open and one eye closed. No, you face it as salt and you face it as light. So you face it head on, but you always keep your word open. That's how you do it. Any other questions? No other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We apologize for the inconvenience on yesterday with noonday. And so praise God for the faithfulness, the commitment of our media team. They work hard all the time, and they're working on that as well as some additional matters to make sure that we can continue to bring the word to you. So we look forward to the prayer call tomorrow morning at 6:30, and continuing this series. We'll pick back up on next week, not only with noonday, but also with Wednesday night Bible study. Be safe, be smart, be sensible. Continue to say your prayers, and God is going to see us through. Take care.